This is Mohammed Abdelkader. I'm the Executive Director of the Stevens Initiative. We're so happy you guys could be here with us today. This is the first in our series of webinars that we are putting out there for the community to share. We've gotten a lot of feedback. This is something that would be helpful, and we wanted to be as responsive as we can. We're very excited to have with us today Dr. Katja Riikonen, who is joining us virtually. She is a member of the Soliya team. You may know Soliya is one of our partner organizations, and she's going to be presenting today on facilitating collaborative learning experiences through virtual exchange. We're very excited to have Katja with us today. So Katja, thanks for being here with us. Just a couple of housekeeping notes for you guys who are joining us. We have folks from all over the United States and all over the world actually on this webinar, so we're very excited to have you. If you have questions, please enter them into your chat box and we'll get to them periodically throughout Katja's presentation. But we'll also be taking questions on our Twitter handles. So for those of you who are on Twitter, our handle is Stevens, INIT. So make sure to check those out. And if you have any questions, please stay engaged and let us know. Without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Katja to start her presentation. Katja, can you hear us? Take it away.
I can hear you well, and I hope you can hear me too. And welcome from my behalf as well. It's really great to be here with you today. Today we're going to talk about facilitating collaborative learning in virtual exchange, and I wanted to first introduce who I am. So my name is Katja Riikonen, as you heard, and I am Curriculum and Virtual Exchange Specialist at Soliya. And I have been working in this field for the past 10 years and have been involved in Soliya's programming in various different capacities. Starting from program implementation and quality control to program design and developing learning materials, and more recently developing our online learning space for our global community. And I'm speaking to you from Finland. It's actually a nice sunny evening here today, and I'm very pleased to be with you and talk about Soliya's work in virtual exchange. Soliya is an international non-profit organization, and we operate at the intersection of technology, peace building, and global education. Soliya's story really started after 9/11, when our two founders wanted to create a space for young people to directly communicate and engage with each other online, to discuss what was happening in the world and what do they think and feel about it. So from this idea of dialogue space for young people to connect, Soliya created virtual exchange programs to enable these connections and to create more effective and cooperative relations within and between these societies. And of course, with this aim, our vision is very much linked to the broader vision of virtual exchange that aims at providing these meaningful cross-cultural experiences as part of education to increasing number of young people globally. And in this educational experience, the aim is really to provide, in addition to those very important communication and collaboration skills, also those attitudes that are required for those skills to be used effectively and compassionately in the interconnected world that we all live in. So I know that there are several different organizations who are doing virtual exchange, and of course everyone has their own model for their work. So today I'm going to specifically talk about Soliya's program design and learning models. And I'm going to explain how we have provided this space for young people to communicate and engage with each other, and how does learning happen in this space. So first I'm gonna give you the context of our programs and the program design. What do we hope our participants achieve when they participate in Soliya, and what does collaborative learning mean in our context? And after that, I wanted to dive a little deeper into our learning model and see how exactly does learning happen in dialogue, and what elements in our program design support that learning process. And finally, I wanted to briefly go over some things to take into consideration when thinking about setting up and designing a virtual exchange program. And as we go along, we will pause between the sections to see if you have any questions. And I would warmly welcome all thoughts and questions that you have. You can type them in the questions box here, as was mentioned earlier, and we will address them as we go along. I'm also trying to connect what we do online in Soliya to other contexts. So also, if you have those examples yourself, please feel free to share those too. I think we would all benefit from hearing those experiences and context and links that you might be familiar with. So let's start. I wanted to begin with our program model and introduce you to our virtual exchange programs. Soliya has 2 dialogue programs and 2 dialogue facilitation training programs. And today I will programs, but the learning methods of the training are very similar too. So the 2 dialogue programs, called the Connect program and the Connect program Compact, connect young people from Europe, the US, North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, either in 8-week or 4-week semesters. And these young people participate usually through an educational institution, for example, a university or language center or cultural center. And Soliya is integrated into university courses across a variety of disciplines. And the dialogue participants are placed in a group which stays the same for the duration of the semester. These groups are as diverse as possible. Diverse in the sense of culture, region, gender, religion, demographics, to provide a truly cross-cultural experience. And the actual space for these groups to engage in is one that Soliya has custom built for dialogue. So next, let's have a look at an image of the online room that we have to show what type of space it is and how does it look like to be in a virtual exchange program. So here you can see everybody who is participating in the group is in a circle, also the facilitators or trainer in this case. And we can see everybody's video in equal size. There is also a visual cue to tell the group who is talking, who has the microphone. There is a purple frame around the person's video who has the microphone. In the room, you can communicating by taking the microphone or typing in the chat box that's in the middle. And you're also able to send a private message to a participant to reach out privately without the rest of the group knowing. And you can also communicate with your video. Seeing each other's body language is very important in an online group to get a sense of the person you are with. And you can also see one participant on the left showing thumbs up as a response to a question that was just asked. And this is a quick way to communicate in the room using those little visual cues. So this is the space where our programming and learning in virtual exchange happens. So what do we exactly hope our participants learn in the process? Firstly, we aim everyone to take away some important cross-cultural communication and collaboration skills. And this means, for example, simply the ability to engage in dialogue across difference, or the ability to represent one's point of view and also provide a space for hearing the points of view of others. An important skills also include critical thinking that I will be speaking much more about in a short while. And as mentioned before, in addition to skills, also attitudes are essential. For example, one attitude we hope to shift is empathy. And that really encourages participants to approach dialogue and differences with genuine curiosity and an intention for understanding. Empathy also enhances participants' ability to not to agree with, but to appreciate and respect diverse perspectives. And another example of an attitude is critical awareness that addresses the awareness of where does those opinions of others stem from, including also developing a clearer understanding of one's own perspective. So in the learning process, you learn about others, but you also learn about yourself. And finally, we have activation. After participating in our virtual exchange programs, we hope that participants have the ideas, skills, tools, and of course also confidence to engage constructively across difference in the future. Important focus for me in all these goals is the way participants engage with difference when they are together as a group. And next I have an image of a flower to illustrate this process and hopefully make it as tangible as possible for everybody. So here you can see a beautiful flower. Learning in dialogue really allows participants to gain understanding of the perspective of others in the group. Not only those initial positions or the opinions expressed that you might see when you meet the person for the first time, but specifically the underlying emotions, assumptions, values, biases, or social norms, as well as personal experiences that shape these positions. So dialogue allows the participant to become more aware where one's own position stems from, and that critical awareness I was talking about. So the purpose of learning in dialogue is really to uncover these roots below the surface. So any discussion in the learning process should not stay merely at the surface level of expression, but move into deeper engagement with others and their thinking. So to go from expression to engagement. An example of this could be a topic of immigration and integration. The discussion as a cross-cultural group might start with everybody sharing what they think about immigration and integration. Some might be for and some against immigration. Some might not have a clear view what they think. But then discussion should move on to exploring how the different people have arrived to those positions. What are the personal experiences, contexts, values, and beliefs, perhaps, that have influenced the way they think? So, for example, in this topic, one could sort of discover what are the values in my family or in my community that impact my views. Do I have significant experience on immigrants in my country or in my community? Or perhaps my family has immigrant background impacting my views. So all of these we try to uncover in the process of dialogue. And what's important for me is that the same method of going beyond the surface level positions applies whether the topic is cultural sharing or personal stories or more rigorous academic subject. So our thinking in all of those is influenced by our personal and cultural context, and this is what we want to uncover and discuss in dialogue. And I think this is especially essential when we think about what critical thinking and critical awareness means for us. In our group discussions, we welcome conflicting views and uncertainties. People don't have to have ready-made answers or clear formulated thoughts before they can share or take part in the discussion. Emotions are also welcome in dialogue, and their presence is usually a great opportunity to learn for the group. An emotional reaction is often a sign that the topic discussed is important for the person, or they have some kind of close personal connection to the topic, meaning it allows the cross-cultural group to learn something important about that person and their differences. So rather than trying to sideline emotions from the learning process, as often is the case in the academic context, dialogue welcomes and wants to acknowledge emotions and try to uncover why some might have an emotional reaction to a topic and others not. And what does having an emotional reaction to mean to the communication as a cross-cultural group? So, for example, the first thing an emotional reaction usually impacts is the way we listen. So we tend to focus on what we want to say next and get across in a discussion rather than hearing where others come from, of course, making it difficult to truly engage in a cross-cultural discussion. So then the group, dialogue group, can discuss where those perhaps conflicting views or emotions come from, and what do they mean when we communicate together? What impact do they actually have? And also to how we collaborate with a diverse group of people. So for example, how can we make sure we continue listening and continue discussion with someone who actually thinks very differently on this topic, even though we are triggered by the topic and have an emotional reaction? So cultivating genuine curiosity and an intention for understanding what we earlier defined as empathy, participants can take ownership of this process of inquiry, start digging below the surface themselves. And when this happens in the learning process, for us this means that when participants themselves want to get to those roots and ask questions from each other to help people to get there, then participants are truly learning both the skills and attitudes required for constructive cross-cultural communication and collaboration. So before moving on, let's pause for questions, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts about the issues covered so far.
This is Henry from the Stevens Initiative. It's wonderful to be with all of you here today. If you have any questions, please type them in the questions section of the webinar, and we'll be glad to share them with Katja so she can answer them. Katja, I'm seeing a few questions here from folks online asking about measurement and metrics. You share a pretty sophisticated approach to discussion, and I think the group is interested in how you might go about starting to measure the outcomes that you're seeking to have in this kind of dialogue.
Great, thank you for the question. I feel like this is a very important question that also could relate to the very last section of what I wanted to say, but perhaps I can speak a little bit of, firstly, the importance of having these tools for measurement for this field to effectively show that also virtual exchange has a positive impact on the participants. So Soliya has two different ways to measure the impact of online exchange, and we have developed our own surveys and own method of testing participants before and after the program. We have also worked in collaboration with MIT to develop more general tools that would be applied for other virtual exchange implementers also to be able to test the virtual connection and impact it has. So that is still an ongoing process. As far as I know, other virtual exchange implementers also have design their own measurement tools, usually based on surveys pre and post program to measure the impact. But I feel like it's very important that we also get those third-party tools out there to ensure that our measurements and our impact is being validated.
Thanks, Katja, and thanks to Bert and Beatrice for questions that I tried to combine there. Marina asks a follow-up question, which is, how do you track the progress of impact in the Connect program over time in the long term? Is that something that you've worked on, Katja?
Again, a truly important question. Unfortunately, I have not worked in a sort of a longer-term impact study, and Soliya has not done a rigorous study to this date to measure long-term impact, and I feel like this might be a more difficult challenge. I can definitely later on speak about the diversity of participants who come to a program, and the learning that happens depends very much on everybody's sort of starting level when they enter the dialogue. So the impact can be also very much depending on the individual. So unfortunately, I have also only sort of anecdotal information of a longer term impact, which could be simply a courage to speak in a school conference because they can now have the confidence for public speaking, or confidence to take part in an exchange program and travel to another country, or fully immerse themselves in a topic that's related to something that they discussed in the dialogue and international cooperation. So unfortunately, I have a better answer for that.
Thanks, Katja. There are a few other questions where folks are asking to go a bit deeper, and I know that there are some more modules to cover in the rest of the presentation, but Stephen and Arij both want to know, what are some additional recommendations or tips you would have for getting to the level of discussion and dialogue that Soliya seeks. Are there any other major recommendations that you would share at this point?
That's exactly what I was hoping to share next. So what I wanted to talk in my next section is, how do we get to those goals? How does that learning happen in dialogue, and how do we get to those roots? So I might continue with my second section, and hopefully I'll answer those questions. Of course, if there are any further clarifying questions, I'd be happy to answer after that section.
Thanks, Katja. I think we should proceed to the next section, and we'll certainly keep track of all of the unanswered questions and work them in when it seems appropriate later in the call.
Great. So yeah, let's dive a little bit deeper and get into more concrete. Of course, just getting a diverse group of participants together and saying let's talk is not enough for the group to get there. So I want to go over in more detail, how do we ensure constructive learning actually happens, both before the dialogue program starts and then while conducting dialogue. So I'm going to talk about specifically the role of curriculum, learning environment, our facilitation model, and reflection. So let's start with the role our curriculum plays in this. Our dialogue programs have semi-structured curriculum, meaning that there are some common elements to all dialogue groups, but there are also elements a specific group can choose themselves depending on what they identify as important for them. So firstly, we have a set of activities and discussion topics common for everybody, all dialogue groups, especially in the start of the semester, to ensure the dialogue process and the group process starts well for everyone. Significant amount of time is reserved for free-flowing dialogue, and this means discussion where the aim is exactly for the group to take ownership on how they communicate with each other, so start digging themselves to get to the roots. The topics in the free-flowing discussion are mostly chosen by the group itself. So they identify what they would like to address as a group, what they find most important. And this enables individualized learning processes to some extent. In the curriculum, we have provided discussion guides for the topics that often come up to help our facilitators with these discussions. And there is also a selection of communication tools and skill-building activities to implement depending on the group's needs. So what would help that particular group to enhance their dialogue? So, for example, a group has chosen to talk about gender, but has a really hard time listening to each other, and the discussion remains at that surface level. So the facilitators of the group notices this and then goes to the curriculum and selects a short activity that helps the group to work on active listening. And then the group continues the discussion, and they can later assess together if there was any improvement in how they communicated with each other, and especially how they listened. So this highlights that this is also a learner-led process. We do place an important role for the learner to take ownership, and we expect the learner as individual to contribute both to the content of the dialogue and taking ownership of the process of communication, and also of the group's collaboration. Because in this model of dialogue, participants also very much learn in the process of collaborating together in dialogue. So learning how to function as a cross-cultural group, how to sustain the conversation, and taking joint ownership of that is not always easy and requires practice, but this is exactly what the dialogue process is for, and is a very important part of the learning process itself. So I suppose this makes sense, as you can't really learn communication by any other way than just getting right in there and communicating yourself. But there is a structure and support in the curriculum for the groups in that learning process. In addition to curriculum, it's important to set up a constructive environment for learning. And this can mean different things, but I'm going to highlight two important elements for us. Virtual exchange is always technology enabled, and today we have a variety of tools for communication available for us. But none of those tools are neutral, but they very much set parameters for programming. who is able to access the tool and who is not, or what type of communication does it enable or favor, and whose voice or participation does that particular tool or mode of communication encourage. So as we saw before, Soliya has built a platform that is custom made for dialogue and tries to be as inclusive as possible when it comes to connection speed or equipment needed to access the platform, so as many people as possible could join. And the platform also enables multiple ways to communicate, as we saw before, to cater for the needs of different types of learners. And this is especially taking into account the different levels of English our participants have and comfort levels of engaging with their group they don't know beforehand or just speaking publicly. The second element important in creating this conducive learning environment is the presence of safety, honesty, and discomfort in the actual learning process. And I understand that the concept of safe space can mean a variety of different things, but here's how it relates to our specific learning model. So in order to learn, participants should feel safe enough with each other to speak out what they really think, and also able to express their feelings and opinions honestly, even when it might be quite difficult. So ideally, this means that group members express their honest opinions even when they know that others disagree in the group, which often is case in diverse groups, and that they're also willing to share their own confusion when they are perhaps internally conflicted about what they think and feel. So when people have this basic sense of safety, it can create enough discomfort to provoke learning. So for us, learning happens when we feel both safe and uncomfortable. If we feel really unsafe, it's really hard for us to take in new information or share anything about us. And this is related to the idea that is often used in informal learning of stretching outside one's comfort zone, just the right amount for there to be learning. And I want to highlight that this does not mean that we want to shy away from challenging topics or discussions. On the contrary. We feel that those are crucial for young people to experience, to really learn how to engage with difference and continue the discussion even when the group members disagree, and continue in a constructive manner. But for us, it is essential to create the safe space first before starting any adventures outside of it. To perhaps give you an example, in our dialogue, this means that when we have spent time in a group to ensure the feeling of safety, normally there are activities to get to know each other, and perhaps starting with a lighter topic first. Often participants feel comfortable and confident enough to bring challenging topics to the discussion themselves, or maybe very personal stories and emotions. And this in turn helps the whole group to learn. So the initiative to talk about challenging topics could come from the participants themselves. All of these curriculum and constructive learning environments would not happen without group facilitators. All facilitators in Soliya are trained by us. They go through the advanced dialogue facilitation training where they practice leading cross-cultural dialogue groups and different group dynamics. And facilitators in our model are distinctly different from teachers. They are process leaders, but they don't have the sole decision-making authority, nor do they contribute to the substance of the discussion. The facilitator's aim is to lead the group process and to help everyone in the group to communicate and engage. And in this way, facilitators are neutral. They help others express their views and thoughts, but they themselves are not doing that. Facilitators also ensure the building and maintaining of that safe space I was talking about, and they do this by being multipartial. And multipartiality means that you as facilitator in the discussion are providing support, mostly through your listening and attention to all those present in the discussion to ensure everybody feels all thoughts and opinions are equally welcome and appreciated. And even to some extent that to a group of people or views who would not be present in the discussion, but whose opinion is somehow extremely relevant for the ongoing discussion. So, for example, if there is a topic of a very topical issue to a current event and a viewpoint that is very well presented or very much prevalent in the current media, a multipartial facilitator can bring in this viewpoint to the discussion too, so that the group has multiple different views to discuss. Facilitators also guarantee that there is good discussion, that the dialogue does go beyond that surface level. And they, for example, do this by modeling the type of questions they want the group to ask, or the type of multidimensional curiosity that they want the group to use in the discussion. And finally, facilitators ensure that there is space for reflection. And this is a really, really important element in our learning model. Facilitators make the dialogue process explicit through observations and meta discussions, so discussions about discussion. So the groups, they don't only talk about the topic of the day, let's say gender, but also how the group discussion and engagement on gender went and why. So for example, a facilitator in this case could say that, I noticed that today in our discussion, you did not ask so many questions from each other than in our previous meetings. Did you guys notice the same? And how did you feel in our discussion? And what impacted your participation today? And so the group would have this reflection about how they engaged and discussed, and they can also together think of ways they can ask each other more questions in the future. And the facilitator also can go back to the curriculum and do an activity of asking questions to start the next dialogue session with. So this is the kind of the way and process how facilitators promote awareness of dialogue and in turn promote the awareness of the learner's own communication and collaboration in the process. And I wanted to also highlight that there are really multiple levels of reflection as part of the dialogue process. That's why I feel it's such an important process, part of the process. So there can be group reflection on the specific discussion topic or the dialogue process so far, or a particular element in the communication that is challenging for the group. But there is also this broader level of reflection relating to an element of the program design called space learning. And this means that participants, when they're taking part in this cross-cultural experience once a week, they do it in their own environment. So between the sessions, participants usually reflect the dialogue experience and how they felt and how the discussion went in their classrooms with their peers, but also often with their friends and family outside any formal education setting. So this reflection on being in the cross-cultural group in their own context means that the experience is really not separate of their own context, but very much part of that environment. So I know I have been talking for a while now and would love to turn back to your questions and see how could I help clarifying things, and if you have questions on things I haven't touched upon, would be great to answer those too.
Thanks very much, Katja. To those in the audience, we welcome more questions typed in the questions section. Thank you very much for the many questions you've shared during the earlier pause and also in the last few minutes. Please do type any more questions and we'll do what we can to integrate them into the conversation. Katja, I have a question from Ghislaine. She asks, I'd like to know if the subject is defined by Soliya or the participants, if the participants can share their own subject, and if there is some space for the participants to suggest their own topics, how are facilitators prepared to engage with those topics or allow the conversation to take an unexpected direction?
Great, thank you for the question. The dialogue process usually starts with topics and activities provided by Soliya, just to ensure there is a good start for all groups. But from the very get-go, the facilitators encourage the participants to start identifying those topics that are really important for them and that they would like to talk as a cross-cultural group. So there are a few topics during the 8-week semester that are provided by Soliya. Usually we find that those are topics that the participants also often identify themselves, but outside of those couple of topics, we really sort of place the trust for the groups to identify what is important for them to talk. And there could be discussions about what is it that the group really wants to discuss. So there is very much space for the group to identify what's actually valuable for them as a group to talk and dive into. And yeah, the second part of the question was around facilitators. So we notice these trends of topics and discussions, especially if there are very timely topics or something that is very sort of much ongoing at the time of the semester. So we provide these discussion guides for facilitators to help navigate those discussions if they arise. But it is very true that sometimes as facilitator, you might end up facilitating a discussion where you don't necessarily have that supportive discussion guide or very much knowledge of the topic yourself, but then relying on those basic facilitation skills of leading the conversation and placing the focus on the group itself usually helps navigate those discussions too.
Thanks very much. We have several questions that popped up almost simultaneously. There's a lot of interest in this topic about what prepares facilitators. So can you say more about the process from identifying the people who will be facilitators, training them, providing them support, and then finally, are there any of those resources that are available to the people on this call, public resources, or is there an open call for new facilitators?
Great. I'm very happy to talk or have this opportunity to talk a little bit about our facilitation training too. So thanks for the question. So we have a pretty intensive dialogue facilitation training to prepare our facilitators for this. So we have two models, basic training and advanced facilitation training. The introduction training is really for those who don't have a lot of background in dialogue facilitation, helping everybody who is interested but don't necessarily have a lot of background to also have the opportunity to facilitate, in Soliya programs. The advanced training is 20-hour training, which is mostly practice. We have created a lot of online and also interactive learning materials, readings, videos, different type of resources that you can kind of get the more sort of theory or the idea sort of context from, but then the actual training time would be really spent on practicing those. So majority of the training time is actually you getting right in there and practicing what facilitating cross-cultural group and different dynamics can be. And what for me is essential in this is that the learning in our training happens also in cross-cultural groups. We try to make those training groups also diverse to really help everybody to know what is learning together as a cross-cultural group, but also to get an authentic experience on facilitating one. During the semester, we also have a wealth of resources for our facilitators for, going and have a range of different dynamics or different issues that might come up. But we also have a peer support network where facilitators can turn if they're not sure about something that is happening in the group. And we also have our quality control team who is also there for facilitator support. At the moment, all our facilitator resources, the resource library on dialogue facilitation is reserved for Soliya community members. So at the moment, unfortunately, there aren't any public resources, but I would definitely, of course, welcome anybody who is interested in looking into our website and learn more about the training to see if you perhaps would like to take part.
Thanks very much, Katja, and thanks for the great questions from the group. There were a few interesting questions about some challenges that might arise in online dialogue. And I'll just mention a couple, and Katja, if there are others that you are planning to get to, maybe we can flag them. One question specifically was about power inequalities. How do you address power inequalities in the design of this program, and how are facilitators trained to address them in the room? And maybe a tangential question is, how does the program account for people with very strong opinions who may be pulling the conversation in a direction that wasn't intended, or may be very tricky? Thanks.
Thank you again for great questions. And I have to reveal a sort of personal issue, which is that I very much think power dynamics, or taking those power inequalities into account in virtual exchange, is really important. And this is certainly a topic I would and could speak at length, but I wanted to recognize that in our programming, at least, we have sort of divided these power inequalities and power dynamics into two categories. So first one is, what are the power imbalances that we have inbuilt in our program? So of course, technology is one of them. I mentioned earlier that we have tried to create a platform that is as inclusive as possible, but there are still participants who have more technical issues than others, impacting, can they participate and how they can participate. Perhaps they're not able to broadcast their videos, or they can only participate by typing, etc. So technology is one of the inbuilt power imbalances. But the other one is language, and this is of course significant because everybody who is participating in Soliya does so by using English, and this of course puts people in a very different position when it comes to really expressing themselves, what they truly feel, and their personal stories and narratives. So we recognize that these are the inbuilt power imbalances in Soliya, and we also talk about this in training at length, and we have specific methods in dialogue to, especially in the very beginning, to ensure that these are openly voiced and addressed, and when, for example, issues related to language or technology happens, facilitator directly target that and ensure that as much as possible those who are lesser able to participate have the support they need to be heard. But then there are, of course, these other power dynamics that relate to actually what happens in actual dialogue and what happens in the particular group. And maybe those strong opinions actually could go into the same theme too. So there, of course, facilitators have been guided to learn or to work on power dynamics, and this is actually, especially if the power dynamics are very entrenched, this can require the help of the Soliya staff to uncover. We also have a specific training module specifically on how to facilitate power dynamics in a cross-cultural group. So we try to provide our facilitators as much support as possible, but I think this is a really important thing to take into account when it comes to program design, but also if you're facilitating a group like this. So just to go back to the last question, and how do you actually then deal with somebody who has very strong opinions? I think very often they take a lot of space in the dialogue, both sort of, space in terms of speaking at length, but also maybe making other people in the group more quiet. So the facilitator's role is then to just ensure that everybody is feeling like their voice is being supported and valued also in the dialogue. So their active facilitation, those moments, is crucial. But of course, if somebody is perhaps being disruptive despite sort of talking about or reminding the group of the goals of dialogue and goals of communication, then facilitator can also reach out privately to that participant to perhaps ask them to pay more attention to listening.
Thanks very much, Katja. I think for the sake of time, we should probably move on to your last main slide. And then if we have a couple more minutes, maybe one or two more questions before Mohammed closes the session.
Sure, great. I wanted to just leave you with this kind of one slide that sort of recaps some of the things you might want to take into account when planning a virtual exchange program and thinking about its design. And some of these points I can go through quite quickly just because we have talked about them already in our webinar today. So the role of technology, something I did mention earlier, and how important it is really to think about what tool enables the type of participation and communication suitable for your program and for your target group. And then, of course, one thing that, you know, we pay a lot of attention to is integration to a course. So how the virtual component is integrated into the home course, whether it's a university course or something else, if there is one. So Soliya Connect program is often a part of a university course where participation is included in the credit participants receive for the course. So finding out a model that works for you and also encourages motivation to take part is you know, definitely something to take into account. As it's talking about scheduling and time zones, if you have even one participant or one partner in your virtual exchange program, not to mention multiple across the world, scheduling can be very difficult because you need to take into account the various end and start times of semesters for each different participating institution, and the different holidays and festivals in different cultures and religions. And of course, when thinking about the time zones available for participants. So, for example, in our Connect program, some young people in the US are doing dialogue very early in the morning, whereas their peers in the Middle East, for example, log in when it's already very late for them. So thinking about how do the different time zones and login times actually impact participation and communication also, and how could you navigate to ensure that everybody has a happy medium. So again, something to keep in mind. Clarity of expectations is important, and this can be both from the perspective of participating institutions, but also individual participants. And this is especially important because participating in a dialogue program is very different in nature as opposed to taking part in perhaps a normal university course, for example. They're used to their expectation of participation and expectation of what the actual learning goals are very different. So ensuring before the program, and especially in the beginning of program, that everybody has as clear understanding as possible. And of course, differences in communication abilities. This is again something that we talked about earlier. As a cross-cultural group, this is bound to have an impact because people have different language levels, or you know, they might be less comfortable, more comfortable speaking in a cross-cultural group, or whatever. So what are the different mechanisms you have in place for this? And of course, power dynamics we mentioned already. And finally, I feel like you know, just important kind of thought for me to leave you guys with to end my slides is whose voice is heard. So all of these different aspects account to whose voice is actually heard in the virtual exchange program and how, and keeping this question in mind helps at least me when thinking about designing the programs. So if we have a couple of minutes more, we can go for more questions, but yeah, would love to welcome if you have more questions.
Katja, thank you again for the presentation. I think in the interest of not running over time and recognizing that there are many great questions that we could follow up on, I think we're going to have to wrap up the session here and say that we will certainly keep these questions in mind. I want to turn it back over now to Mohammed Abdelkader to close the session.
Hey guys, Katja, thank you so much for such a great webinar. We were all really Really glad that you were able to share all that information with us. And for all of you who joined in today, thank you so much. We hope you learned a lot. We certainly did. And we will continue to have more of these webinars on an ongoing basis. So a few things, I know there were several questions that were unanswered. We have logged those in, and we will try to get the answers to those and get them back to you, whether over email or on our blog. So keep checking our website. So what I would also say is please get on the website, stevensinitiative.org, sign up for our email list. Also, if you're interested in joining an existing virtual exchange program, there is a matchmaking form on there, and that's open to anyone to join. If you are an institution and you have an existing program, or you're an organization with an existing program and you would like to invite more folks, please also get on and you can put your information in seeking additional partners. We are happy to help facilitate that. Again, that's www.stevensinitiative.org. You will find that all there. I do want to plug on September 14th, we'll be having a Twitter chat at 8 p.m. Eastern Time with the Asia Society. As you may know, they have a global ed chat every other Thursday, I believe, on Twitter. So again, that's September 14th, 8 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you're online to check that out for some more discussion about virtual exchange. And then finally, we want to hear from you guys. We want to hear from the practitioners and the educators and the students. If there are more topics you want to see us address in this particular format, let us know. Reach out through our website or on Twitter. We'll be paying attention and hopefully scheduling future webinars to respond to your needs. So again, thank you guys so much for joining. Katja, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. This has been recorded, and what we are going to do is actually post it on our YouTube channel. So again, stay on our listserv for more updates, and we will update you once this webinar goes live. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.